I'm Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 81st webinar in our series to empower nonprofits for success. This one is both on a professional and personal level, very special for me. It's about launching a nonprofit, and it's based on just real life experience. About 3 years ago, a mutual friend who is a wonderful philanthropist in her own right named Barbara Williams, and I hope she's in the audience, let me know that she had a friend who wanted to form a nonprofit, and she wanted to get us together. Of course, like life is, I think the toughest thing was finding a time when the three of us could get together. Ended up just being the two to get together. Her name is Jasmin Dean, and she had led a varied background. She calls herself a Jackie of all trades in marketing and communications and public relations. And she has 3 sons all with dyslexia. And when she found out that the oldest was diagnosed, she didn't know where to turn for the help. So in July, I think exactly about 3 years ago, she came to the conclusion, I am going to take control of this. And she decided she wanted to form a nonprofit. So in July of 2019, we had the first of many meetings at a Starbucks. And that's not to give a commercial plug for Starbucks, because our last meeting was at Dunkin' Donuts. But she told me she wanted to form a nonprofit. I looked her squarely in the eyes and said, Jasmin, you know how much work that is? It is almost a Herculean amount of work. And she said, yes, I know it's a lot of work. And she became a very active member. Before COVID, we would have live workshops, and she would always be there and would always ask questions and network with the audience. And then we switched over to the webinar format in March of 2020, and she became one of the most active members of our learning community. And in between then, that's about 3 years, I think it's almost a case of the student surpassing the teacher. But we met the other day, and I asked Jasmin, how much time have you put into this dream of forming a nonprofit? And she got out, put some new batteries in her calculator, and said, really, she's in the last 3 years put over 10,000 hours. And thanks to her 10,000 hours, we now have a vibrant organization that is completely devoted to fostering a community that celebrates, that educates, and empowers those with dyslexia. And she's going to give you the unvarnished version of her journey, all the proud accomplishments and some of the opportunities and the improvement in her 10,000-hour journey to launch Celebrate Dyslexia. Let me just tell you, the last 3 years, Jasmin, it has been a joy on a personal and professional level to become friends, because that's what I concern you, and know that there are people like you out there. So I have a lot of questions. I'd like to introduce there's Marv. Hi, how are you doing? Haven't seen him lately. John Largent, who's CEO of Game Day Media, is our producer. John, can you take a moment? I have a lot of questions. I don't know, about 10,000, maybe 10,000 questions for Jasmin. But anytime someone in the audience has a question or comment, there are 2 ways they can bring that to our attention. They can either type it in the chat space, or they, better yet, that we can help see their pretty face and they can come on camera. Can you explain how they can do that, John?
Sure, absolutely. Welcome everybody to this week's show. And if you do have any questions, down at the bottom of your screen, you can put in in the chat space, you can actually put in your question. Or if you want to come on camera, you can actually raise your hand. You'll see that also down at the bottom, and I will call on you, and you will you'll get a prompt on your screen to allow us to bring you on. So either one of those ways to ask questions, we're happy to have you on, and we look forward to your great questions this week. Back to you, Jim.
Okay, Jasmin, I have a lot of questions ready for you. Some of them aren't too easy. So we're going to go, we're going to be truth tellers here. The first question, 10,000 hours, 3 years later, if you could do anything differently, what would you do differently?
I knew this question was coming and wrapping my head about what I would do differently.
I thought you said you were going to dye your hair blonde.
No, I don't know that I would do anything differently, honestly, because all along the way we've learned so much, and every single lesson has been important to help this living, breathing organism of a nonprofit serve our community. So I am grateful for all the opportunities. Not all of them have been exactly what I have hoped for, but even through that, we have learned and become stronger in our work and in our mission.
Well, thank you for the Herculean work you've done, or Wonder Woman type of work. Okay, you didn't say you would have done anything differently. What surprised you the most? What surprised you the most?
What surprises me the most is the tragedy that the story is told over and over and over again of the struggle of these families that have dyslexic children, in addition to the adults that went all those years undiagnosed or not serviced through intervention for their dyslexia and still struggle to read, and what that has done to them from the social emotional aspect of their life. Even though everybody's different and comes from different angles, it's the same thread of the same story of struggle. And I knew that we weren't alone, even though we felt like we were alone at the beginning. But even 3 years now of talking to all kinds of dyslexic people or parents of dyslexic children, it's the same story being told over and over again.
Now, Jasmin, you have 1, 2, 3 sons with dyslexia. Is that right? John, right. Could you put the slide? Let's meet the Dean family. Could you put the Dean family on the screen? Here they are. How about you tell us who's in this? And I understand this is a couple of years old because some of the boys are taller. Tell us about, let's meet your family, okay?
Great. Well, it just makes me so happy to talk about these people in this picture. On the left is my husband of almost 20 years, Jeff Dean. He's an orthopedic surgeon here in the community. And on his lap is our youngest son, Joshua, who is now 9. Next to me is Jonah, our oldest son, who is turning 15 at the end of August, and reminded me the other day that he doesn't look anything like this anymore.
Did you tell me the boys are a little taller now?
Yeah, he's 6'2" and he really wants this picture replaced. And then next to him is our middle son, Jordan, who just turned 13.
Tell them that we will, next time we show the Dean family, they'll be a lot taller.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a lot of questions. The first one, why do you think so few people understand dyslexia?
You know, I think there are we've learned over the past couple of years, really listening to all different stakeholders in this conversation, is the system at place has not supported the training of teachers, the information to parents, and the intervention to students. There have been so many barriers all along the way for each of these stakeholders to get information quickly, to be able to act on that quickly and in a comprehensive way, that it really, and what we also know about dyslexic individuals is that they're smart. So oftentimes they will fly under the radar. And it isn't until later that they really, all of the issues compound as to not being identified sooner.
How did you discover that your oldest son had dyslexia?
So he really struggled in school. And we kept hearing year after year, oh, he's so compassionate and kind and obedient, but did you know he doesn't know his phonics? He really struggles to read. He developed extreme anxiety in first grade. And I didn't even know, because he was our oldest, so I was cutting my teeth as a mom on him, that there was a stopwatch involved in his day measuring how quickly he was reading. So by second grade, his teacher told me, did you know that every time I pull out a stopwatch, your son panics? I didn't know. I didn't know there was a stopwatch. He wasn't telling me he didn't like a stopwatch. We don't have stopwatches at home. And so it wasn't until a birthday party where I heard from a teacher at that birthday party that she thought that her son might have something called dyslexia. And then I came home and consulted Google and found a list of 100 signs and symptoms of dyslexia. And I think Jonah had 99.9 of those signs and symptoms. And so we requested evaluation because his teacher at the time did not believe that he needed to be referred for evaluation, that he just needed to try harder. So it wasn't until 4 months later that we sat around a conference table and heard what we knew was true, that he was dyslexic.
How do most people discover that loved ones have dyslexia?
Well, this story is very common. We hear it a lot from parents. My kid is struggling and I don't know why. I don't know why, they can't read or they can't pass a standardized test. Sometimes it's later on when students have to take the SAT that they realize.
That's kind of late, isn't it? That's kind of late to discover it.
But as you see, it really comes with these standardized tests, these benchmarks throughout education, that they might have a decent grade point average, but they can't perform well on standardized tests. So I would say in today's environment, most people who are lucky enough to have an identification, so they have a path to intervention, will find out as their kids are failing the STAR tests in 3rd grade. The state of Texas is really trying to assist with legislation to have earlier identification. They have mandatory screeners now in kindergarten and 1st grade, but it hasn't been happening long enough for us to really see concrete evidence of that time frame shifting down to a younger age.
Was it easier for you to discover that your other 2 sons have dyslexia?
For me as a parent, it was, but not necessarily for the school system. So each one of them has a very different journey to identification, simply because we knew more. And, it was the continuous, oh, they're too smart, or they're not failing, therefore they shouldn't be tested. And just because a student isn't failing doesn't mean they're not dyslexic, and doesn't mean that they aren't eventually going to hit their academic wall. So the sooner you have the identification, the better the intervention outcomes will be, and the less failure the student will experience. Therefore, the self-esteem won't also have to be overcome with time.
Yeah. Okay. It's a good thing people like me didn't scare you away. But how'd you make this decision? I'm not going to wait for someone else. I am going to form a nonprofit to focus on this issue.
Well, it was a series of events that happened. It really was someone asking me what I thought was missing from advocacy in the dyslexia arena. And I told her that 1 in 5 kids have this.
Hey, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, 1 in 5 people have dyslexia.
That blows me away. I thought it was something like 1 in 20. You said 1 in 5.
1 in 5 people
that
have
that blows me away.
Yeah. So it was such a shame that when we gathered as a dyslexia community, that we didn't have an opportunity to focus on the strengths of our children and celebrate our children, because there is a lot of trauma involved. There is a lot of suffering involved by the parents and the students as they're navigating their most vulnerable experience through the education system. And so she looked at me like I had a third eye and said, well, you let me know what that space looks like when you find it. And so my background is high profile events. I found an exhibit and begged and pleaded with the curator to bring it to San Antonio. And he said, if I found a place that would host it, that he would bring it to San Antonio. So our hero, Barbara Williams, answered my phone call And I ran all this by her and I said, what do you think? And she said, I think Dan Menely at the Museum really needs to hear about this. And so we went together to visit with Dan. And my charge to him was to help me show the rest of the country how to do dyslexia well. And so I knew that one event doesn't mean a nonprofit should be started, but I started seeing the bigger picture and how what we wanted to do in our community could be done. And that would necessitate a nonprofit to be formed.
And when did you decide? I love the way you call it Celebrate Dyslexia. So you take something that had a negative stigma and you put a positive face on it. How did that come about? I thought that was brilliant.
It's an expression of the soul. It's a belief in seeing who my children are and who their peers are that have dyslexia. And if I can't lead the narrative as a mother by example and telling them I celebrate you, then it's really not honoring the mission and the vision of the work of the nonprofit.
Beautifully stated. You mentioned the exhibit. What else were the first steps? You made this moment. Jim Eskin couldn't scare you away. Nobody could scare you away. You decided you're going to launch a nonprofit. What were the first steps?
So I did attend a class at the San Antonio Area Foundation to be or not to be a nonprofit. And with every question that came up that we should consider before we were to apply for our nonprofit status, it was hands down, yes, 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 yes. I did consult with Barbara and said, what do you think? And she just looked at me square in the eyes and she said, I don't think you have a choice. You have to do this. There isn't any.
That sounds like Barbara Williams.
And so I think that was really a blessing from someone that is such a hero to so many,
right,
and has served in so many nonprofit spaces, that once she gave me that nod of approval, I found the 3 people that would join me on the journey that would need to fill out that paperwork with me to be my first board. And one of them is actually here on this call, Kara Mowry.
Right.
She said yes. And we started learning about how important that mission and vision were. We started talking about strategic planning. We started trying to piecemeal a budget together to pay for that exhibit. And also really connect with our education community here in San Antonio and different spaces and other parents. So those were the first steps that we took.
One of the things that I'm curious, how did you appeal for support from people who did not have loved ones with dyslexia?
Well, awareness is so important, but also the marketing aspect of bringing people on board and bringing them to a seat at the table is also important. And we really believe as an organization, dyslexia affects everybody. There really isn't a family that doesn't have dyslexia. There isn't an organization that isn't touched by someone who's dyslexic. And really, many of our community leaders are dyslexic themselves. And so there were individuals that made connections. And I would happen to say that you, Jim, are a great connector, especially in this space and in the events that you used to have in person, where we were able to connect and have doors open to people who might not have the same mission, but we were aligned in making our community a better place and serving those in need.
You know, you have a wonderful way of leading right into the next question. You would give me these updates and I was amazed at the stature of the people you were meeting with. How did you get meetings with people who were leaders at the local, state, national level?
It really was community members that opened those doors for me. But I would also venture to say, I think having an event, having an exhibit that was here for 6 months, also with such an amazing organization as the Museum, also opened many doors. You know, it isn't a nebulous little place where people haven't heard of it. People know what the Museum is and their stature in the community in itself. So that allowed many doors to open with the longevity that it was here, as well as the buildup to it being here, even with COVID.
Yeah.
It was an opportunity to really connect. And I just learned that it was important to keep showing up, right? And keep,
You know, Woody Allen said, the world belongs to those that show up.
and so it really allowed for many opportunities to connect with people on many different levels, whether it was through our medical initiative, our celebratory initiative, or education initiative, because this is something that really does resonate with so many people, but we don't talk about it.
I say we have a question from Carol Peterson. Can you talk about your exhibit that's on display at the museum and other places? Talk about the exhibit.
So the exhibit that was here was curated by a father of a dyslexic daughter in Oklahoma City, and it was actually at the Oklahoma Science Center for quite a while as a temporary exhibit. And what was really special about it was that it focused on a strength-based conversation.
Yeah.
It talked about what dyslexia was, but it also featured local students that have dyslexia, and they had an opportunity to tell their before they were identified story and transition to the success they had found after they received intervention. And getting to hear their voices tell their story was so powerful. There was also a Hall of Fame of some of the people throughout history that we know were dyslexic.
Hey, you want to share a few?
Well, you know, that's a slippery slope, but I will talk about some that are very public about their dyslexia. Richard Branson is dyslexic. Many of the Sharks are dyslexic. Kevin O'Leary talks about his dyslexia. Barbara Cochran, Damon John. We have—
Isn't Steven Spielberg dyslexic?
Yes, and he found out because one of his children was identified and he realized he was dyslexic himself.
Really?
Through that. Henry Winkler is dyslexic.
The
Whoopi
Fonz?
Goldberg is dyslexic. There are many people that are now talking about their dyslexia.
I say we have a comment from one of our learning community members that she's in Boca Raton, Florida, Margie Helsheim, and she's saying now in there they test everyone. You know how common that is? That all the kids up to grade 5 are tested for dyslexia. You know what the stature of testing is around the country. What's it like in San Antonio, and what's it like in the rest of Texas?
So what I read here, I believe, is that her kids went to a private school where they tested everybody.
Yeah.
I don't really know about private schools because it's not required here in San Antonio. But I can tell you in public schools, the state of Texas requires every kindergartner and first grader to be screened. And there's a difference between screening.
Tell me, what happens in a screening?
So a screening is just kind of like, okay, I like to say it's like a finger prick of blood instead of taking full labs. An evaluation for dyslexia is like taking full labs. It's longer, it's more in depth, it gives you more data, more information. A finger prick is a little bit of information, but not the whole picture.
Yeah.
So they are screened in kindergarten and first grade. And if they're flagged, they're typically put in more intensive reading instruction, but not necessarily dyslexia intervention. They are not officially identified unless a parent or a teacher refers that student for identification in the state of Texas.
Yeah. Okay, let's get back to the mechanics of launching a nonprofit.
Okay.
Which tasks did you like to do yourself, and where did you need to get help?
Which tasks? I love connecting with people. I love strategizing. I love problem solving. I needed to connect and learn how to build a budget. I needed to learn what financials are required in a grant. I needed to learn more about how to apply for grants and what are they looking for, and that you don't just apply to every single grant you find a right fit, and you make a relationship and you make a connection with the grantor. I learned that it's very important to keep cultivating a board.
Talk a little more about that. Talk a little more.
Well,
I like that subject. How would you cultivate your board?
Not just cultivating your board, but realizing you constantly have to be thinking about a succession plan. I hope I get to do this for 25 years, but it was brought to my attention that we can't always control that. We never know when something's going to happen. And so the importance of setting up procedures and policies in the way we operate as an organization, not because I'm sitting in this chair and the particular board member is there, but thinking about what if I'm not sitting in this chair and you aren't on the board? What do we need to do to protect this mission and vision to continue into succession? So board is constantly changing and growing, and it's important, if you really believe that this is applicable and needs to live on, to keep meeting as many people as possible and making the programming relevant to as many generations as possible, so that they can breathe life into the work that you do.
Okay, how did this little thing called the pandemic affect your progress?
Well, we definitely had to pivot a little bit in the way we did things and embrace this thing called Zoom, which I really was reluctant to do. At first, I thought it would just go away, but it didn't. And what it allowed us to do was actually connect with national thought leaders and others around the country that are working in this space and have access to them. So we had a book club with parents that now and wanted to learn more about dyslexia. And we realized that just as many teachers were attending as parents. And so we were so excited that a major giant in the space, Dr. Sally Shaywitz and her husband, joined us. And just seeing her name pop up on my caller ID was just a wild moment for me personally. But now, you know, they have also spoken life into directions that we take and have made introductions for us that have really impacted the work that we do.
You might not have a very specific answer. How many dyslexic organizations do you think there are in the country? Obviously, there were a couple at the national level, but is it common for a lot of cities like Dallas and Houston and Chicago and San Francisco to have a Celebrate Dyslexia?
Well, I will tell you that the national organizations will try to have branches in major cities and try to serve as many people as they can. But everybody is limited by capacity, and it's all very dependent on chapter based on their leader and their angle in this conversation. Not everybody has the same skill set. Not everybody is looking to celebrate. Not everybody is in a space where they can celebrate yet. So there are grassroots organizations where they're very focused on legislative work and advocacy. There's the International Dyslexia Association that has really tried for a long time to address the needs of parents and teachers. And there are other pockets of literacy organizations, but not necessarily one that has the three-pronged initiatives that we have.
How do you share, and people in the other cities share, what they're doing, what they're learning, what works, what doesn't work with each other?
By pigeon carrier. No, I'm just joking. I think technology has allowed us to do that, right? And so they will pick up on something that we post on social media, and I'll get calls from different cities in the country. There are conventions that people can go to, but I will say that the exhibit was a way that opened so many doors, because other advocates in other cities wanted to know how we had done the work that we had done. And it really was to offer this strength-based platform to have this conversation. We were able to offer professional development to teachers within the museum, which was a safe space because it's neutral territory. It's not like it's at a district office or, anything like that. We were able to.
Hey, let me ask you, there's someone in the audience, we caught their attention and they want to see the exhibit tomorrow. What do they need to do?
Well, they need to book it somewhere. So it went from here, it was here for 6 months, and then it went to the Houston Health Museum, and it just closed in May. And so the curator is very happy to bring it to a location near you. And if you just email me, I will connect you to the curator, and you all can have that conversation.
Okay, and we're going to share Jasmine's email and cell phone number. She's been brave enough to also share the cell phone number, and I'll say she will answer both within seconds. Let me talk about the question that's a fun question for all nonprofit leaders. How have you addressed the fundraising challenge?
Well, we've learned a lot. And
what have you learned?
What we've learned is how can we sustain ourselves offering programs that people will pay for, yet serve the community through professional development and that kind of thing. So we're really assessing the needs of the community, listening to the teachers that come to our professional development. What more would you like? What more can we offer you? And really working with school districts as well as our university, the UTSA here in San Antonio, has really allowed us to bring in funding that is more regular. So we also have generous donors that believe very much in our mission and our vision. But the first 2 years of this work were mostly volunteer.
And let me ask you, are most of your volunteers have loved ones that have dyslexia? Or do you have some that do have loved ones with dyslexia and also have some supporters of time and money who do not have loved ones who have dyslexia?
I would venture to say, just off the top of my head, most everybody that comes to us has a relationship, whether it's a family member, direct or indirect, that has dyslexia. Or they teach dyslexic students and they understand how important this is. So most everybody has a direct connection.
Yeah. Hey, we're doing great on time. So I want to welcome, is anybody, we have plenty of time to take questions and comments from the audience. That's a cue there. Anybody else? I have more questions, but I want to get the audience in. Anybody in the audience want to share a question in the chat space or come on camera? Hey, as they're thinking, I want you to take a little time on this question.
Okay.
Jasmin, you've accomplished so much, but what have you identified as your future priorities?
As an organization, our future priorities are really assisting with the charge from UTSA to develop a Department of Dyslexia for them. This will really affect groundwater change here in San Antonio. Constantly looking for opportunities to partner on high profile events. So we commissioned the Magic Theater to
this is wonderful. Talk a little about this play.
Yeah, so we commissioned the Magic Theater to come up with an original play about a child with dyslexia. And it's premiering in October. It will be traveling for about 6 weeks before it comes to the stage. And it will also be traveling for a while in the spring. But it's already won a National Endowment for the Arts award. So
wow,
very excited to bring that value to our community, right? And a community partner. And we have a couple of other things in the works in terms of our celebratory programming. And our medical initiative, our goal is to change the medical code on a diagnostic medical code on a national level.
Yeah.
When we really addressed and assessed our stakeholders, we saw that there were so many barriers to access for information. And so if a parent doesn't get information from the school, where else should they get information from? It's from a well child visit. And so the only way that will truly happen is if there is a specific diagnostic code for a doctor to be able to land on. And it will also allow a referral system, which just does not exist right now in a easy way for parents to get information and to get their children serviced and identified and that kind of thing.
We talked before what surprised you the most in this 3-year journey at 10,000 hours. What do you think was the most pleasant discovery?
I love doing this work in San Antonio. I love that doors open in San Antonio and that the nature of working with others in San Antonio has been exceptional. It's been exceptional. Not every city is like this. Does that really surprise me? Maybe, because I'm now hearing more and more of the stories in other communities. But do I take it for granted? No, and I am so grateful to be serving this community and doing this work here in San Antonio.
Well, we are grateful. And again, you answer a question, can one person make a difference? I say, take a look at Jasmin Dean. What advice, you're going now from the student to the teacher, what advice would you have for people, say in this audience, that are thinking about forming a nonprofit, but they have people like Jim Eskin saying, you know how much work that is? Do you know there's 1.5 million nonprofits out there? What advice would you have to others who are thinking maybe not about dyslexia, but they have a favorite issue that they do not think it's being addressed appropriately? What advice do you have for them?
Well, first I have to say, even after 10,000 hours, I think now knowing more, I realize I don't know as much as I wish I knew, and I still need to learn. So I don't know that I will ever get to the point where I feel like this is just old hat. But what I would say is, if you can't shout your mission and vision from the rooftop and have it be an expression of your soul, don't do it.
Repeat that, please.
If you can't shout your mission and your vision from the rooftop and have it be an expression of your soul, don't do it.
Hey, can I say I said that? I love that. I love that. Thank you, Jasmin. Hey, let's take a look at this from the other side. What are some of the no-nos you've learned in forming a nonprofit? What would you say are some of the no-nos? Don't do these.
I think it's important to listen to everyone who wants to be a partner. But I think it's also very important to have parameters in who you will partner with. Take your time with your mission and your vision, because they will be your guide. They will be the boundaries in which you operate in. They will represent who you are, and they will limit your work as well. Yeah. The no-nos, make sure your bylaws are in order. Make sure that you take your time and get that. Don't ignore the importance of those things. That isn't just a technicality. It really protects the mission and vision from underneath to make sure that if I'm not the one sitting in the seat, the work can continue to be done within those parameters.
3 years later, 10,000 hours later, what has given you the most satisfaction in this journey?
Being able to wake up every morning doing this work. It gets me out of bed in the morning. It is such, I love working with the other thought leaders in this community that are doing tremendous work. I'm so grateful to be able to make this conversation applicable to so many people, even if they don't realize it before we meet, to really make it a safe place for us to be talking about dyslexia and for dyslexic people to say, can you read this to me? I'm having trouble reading it. It really is that this is my life's work. And it took me a while to get here to realize it, but I think all of my background and the events and the opportunities that I had before that really prepared me to be able to do this in the way that I'm doing it.
You know, you remind me when we had Lionel Souza, who had a social entrepreneur organization called Yes, Our Kids Can.
Mhm.
Lionel was an advisor to 3 presidents of the United States, 8 presidential candidates, God knows how many Fortune 500 companies. And he said he felt forming a nonprofit was the culmination of putting to work everything that he had done in his life. It sounds like you're echoing that sentiment.
Well, the other thing he said was running a nonprofit was like running through a cactus field on fire naked. And I would agree with that at times too.
What's happening? And by the way, we're doing great here on time. We might even finish early. So I'm going to check for the audience one last time. But tell us, what do you see? What's happening at the national level as far as addressing dyslexia?
There's so much work happening at the national level. In 2018, there was a federal law passed called the First Step Act, which officially defined dyslexia on the federal level, as well as recognized that there are so many that are incarcerated that have dyslexia and were never given the opportunity to learn how to read. So now upon intake of a federal prisoner, they have to be also evaluated for dyslexia. There is a lot of work on early identification and awareness. There's a movie coming out called Right to Read out of Oakland, California, that talks
what's the timeline on that movie? Will it be out this year, next year?
This year. It will be out this year. And it really talks about this as a social justice issue. Making sure that every child that goes through school learns how to read. Really, it is a green card of living in our society. You can't drive without reading a trans guide sign. You can't vote if you can't read the ballot. You can't really easily go to a restaurant if you can't read the menu.
Right.
And we take all of these things for granted. And there are so many of our neighbors that are suffering in silence because they're not going to talk about the fact that it is not easy for them to process the written text. So I think
do you think there are a lot, where there were 330 million Americans? Do you think there are a lot of undiagnosed people out there?
Yes, there are. And I can tell you in Region 20, which is where we sit as an education center here in San Antonio, we have actually improved in our identification. This does not mean that all of these students are actually receiving intervention, but those that are identified in Region 20 are 4.9%. So how many have it? 1 in 5, 20%. So there's still this huge gap that needs to be filled for identification. So if now, with all of the extra legislative advances that we've had, and now we know every kindergartner and first grader is being screened, and we are trying to identify earlier and earlier, we have 4.9% identified. So that shows you how many before were unidentified and continue to be unidentified.
So that's remains a huge challenge locally, statewide, and nationally. Folks, we're way ahead of schedule. I want to check with the audience, and we might even give Jasmin a little time to go back to work. But first of all, I do have a final question for Jasmin from Carol Patterson. Do you have a regular time to identify the next problem? Carol, could you come on? What do you mean by that? Carol, explain your question a little more.
Well, she's given us her progress in the next big effort that she's made, but I wonder if this is a a sort of planning process, or if it's just she reacts to the next stumbling block that she comes up against, because it looks like you've had a real path through starting with one thing and moving to the next solution.
Well, I think we really focus on these three initiatives. We look for opportunities for celebratory, high-profile events, and those keep evolving. In addition to the exhibit, we have the play, and we'll have other things that come along. So that will keep changing, and that might reflect different industries. It might not just be the theater. It might not just be a museum. It might be athletics. It might be other areas that come along that are high profile. In the education space, what we know is to affect the groundwater of this conversation. The teachers are with the kids 180 days. They are on ground zero. So in addition to training them, we are really working with UTSA and the teacher prep program to make sure this next generation of teachers leaves completely aware and equipped and empowered to work with the dyslexic students in their classrooms. But in addition to that, in the education space, we also have administrators that need guidance on how do we talk to these parents. And a lot of them come in with trauma. So how do we deal with that? So when we are looking at what we are doing, we are trying to address the needs of each stakeholder on a groundwater level through our education initiatives. And then with the medical initiative, once this medical code is changed, our strategy will shift to more of education in the medical world. Medical schools will need curriculum to work with their students. What will the residency programs look like that work with dyslexic students? So while it is evolving, it has to be a very staged opportunity to affect the groundwater of the conversation and not just put out fires as we go along, if that makes any sense.
Carol, that was a great question. Thank you. We're doing great on time. Is there any other questions? And then I have a specific last question for Jasmin, but anybody in the audience want to type a question in the chat space or share a comment on your perspective? We have a little time left. Anybody else? Raise a hand. Okay, we might give Jasmin a little time back, but before we thank you, Jasmin, I want to thank members of our learning community to come together. This has been a great 45 minutes or 47 minutes. John, can you put Jasmin's contact information on the screen?
I sure can.
Jasmin, my question is here, and I hope that you'll like the sound of this.
Okay.
If people want to help, if they want to volunteer, if they want to make a financial gift, if they want to make a difference, how can they do that? Say someone has been motivated by what they've heard you. What are the different ways they can help celebrate dyslexia?
Well, I would love to hear from you. I would love to know which one of these initiatives gets you up in the morning and what you are most excited about what we do, and we will put you to work. There are ways to contact me through the website, but this is probably the most efficient way. Just call me, shoot me a text, shoot me an email, and I will be.
I will guarantee she will respond probably within the hour. And if people want to financially support your cause, how can you do that?
Again, they can contact me. I can send the address. If they want to send a check, ACH information. We will be participating in the Big Give this year, which is the big day of philanthropy here in San Antonio. So we will be in the small
I believe that's September 22nd and 23rd. We had Scott McInish on a couple weeks ago. That's, by the way, that's great. And how about if are there ways they can volunteer time?
Well, if there's a particular skill that you have that you would like to offer us, we will, whether it's working with financials, whether it's whatever your talent is, let me know and we will find a way to get you plugged into the work that we're doing.
Before I think, first of all, Jasmin, thank you for your, not just your leadership that made a profound difference in the San Antonio community, but I think more broadly in the philanthropic community. The big question is, can one person make a difference? And you have put an exclamation point that absolutely one person can make a difference. Thank you. Maybe not everyone can do 10,000 hours, but you have demonstrated that one person can make a profound difference in something, an issue that affects 1 out of 5 people among us. It's not very well understood. And as much progress as they have made, there's still a journey to go. So thank you for inspiring us, Jasmin. And is there any last words you'd like to share before we say goodnight?
So grateful to have been on this journey with you. And it really has been a collective team with my board and other partners that we've had that have really believed and see our mission and vision. And I'm just so grateful to be in this space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jasmin. And let me tell you what's going to happen now. We are going to put a little summary of the discussion on LinkedIn and Facebook. And then our producer is going to edit this tape, and we are going to post it on Facebook and LinkedIn tomorrow morning. Okay, so there'll be a short summary. We've got it down to less than 1,300 character spaces. That's LinkedIn limit. And then we're going to put a recording on Facebook and LinkedIn tomorrow morning, I think around 10 a.m. So Jasmin, again, I have been inspired, because I remember meeting with you for the first time and telling you, you know how much work you have in front of you. 3 years later, you did the work. And again, you proved in a very profound and personal way that one person can make a huge difference. So thank you for making a difference.
It's such an honor. Thank you, Jim.
And let us say goodnight to everyone. And again, go to LinkedIn and Facebook. We'll have a short written summary, and tomorrow morning we'll have a recording to share with you. And again, remember, celebrate dyslexia. And good night, and thank you to our learning community for the differences you're all making in our community. And we'll see you next week. Good night. Thank you, Jasmin. That went perfect.